Takes a second for it to warm up on the YouTube there. So just having a coffee.
I have water.
Water?
Sorry. I had my
Mine's
tea
water
already.
too. I've had so much coffee already today.
I've had too much. I'm shaky. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Coffee Talk on this beautiful Tuesday morning. Joining us for our interactive live stream chat this morning are two of our region's most recognizable marketing leaders, Heather Galt and Christine Tolton. Say hi.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping for everyone joining us online. Please use the live chat to give a little bit of a shout out and let us know where you hail from. It's always nice to see who's out there. And you use the chat as well to ask Heather and Christine questions. You'll need to be logged into your Google account to do that, not to watch, but to post to them. But you can also post them to me on Twitter at nclair using the hashtag CoffeeChatKW. So before we get going on the Q&A, for those of you who may not know Heather or Christine, here's a little bit of a background. I keep looking at the screen over here because I see them over here. So Heather is a highly respected business leader and mentor with global experience delivering results across all aspects of product marketing and demand generation. She is currently the VP at P&P Optica. She's also an active startup and scale-up mentor, and she also makes the time to be very engaged with our community and is currently the chair of the KW Symphony Board, amongst many, many other things. She's an activator, an arranger, achiever. She's a lifelong learner, and from my own personal experience, I know that Heather likes to make shit happen. So welcome, Heather.
Thanks, Norm.
You're welcome. Heather is tag teaming today with another marketing powerhouse, Christine Tolton. Christine is the Chief Idea Officer with Red Cat Marketing, which is a boutique marketing agency that she founded in 2005 after about 20 years in a marketing and advertising career, both with large international agencies and some boutique firms. Christine spends her time developing marketing business strategies for clients from a really broad range of B2B, B2C, and social agencies. She's very involved in the community as well, and she's a very strong believer in modeling this behavior for the younger generation, which is awesome. Christine is an active volunteer and a board member on several different organizations, and she is also the vice chair of the KW Symphony Board. I imagine is that how you guys got to know each other?
Yep.
Awesome. So welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us and for
Thanks, Norm.
sharing your perspectives and your expertise in this crazy days. So I'm just going to take a quick look online. We have a few people joining us. It looks like Jim Beretta has joined us online, and Nelson Dunk from Skylight has also joined us. So welcome everybody online. Thanks for joining us. Maybe a good place to start the discussion is from your perspectives and some of the research that you have been doing or you have exposure to. How are Canadians feeling right now, and what kinds of media are they paying attention to? Any thoughts on that?
Sure. Do you want me to start, Heather?
Go for it.
Sure. So based on my experience with our client, I've had the privilege to get access to various different research that's been done by different organizations. And basically, we've moved into, I think they call it kind of the hair coloring phase of this pandemic now. So we've gotten our toilet paper and we've gotten our eggs, and we're feeling reasonably okay. And we're now moving into the phase of, okay, we think we're going to be here for a little bit now. So now what do we need to do? So it kind of moves on to that second tier of that, what do I need to do to stay at home? basically, based on the latest research that I have seen, and this does vary day to day or even hour to hour, consumers expect that this issue will end in September. And they're assuming that recovery is going to happen, within the fourth quarter from a calendar year. However, having said that, they're also very unsure about, consumers are unsure about what's happening. Unfortunately, as we know, a lot of people have been laid off or lost work. They're having to dip into their savings. What is interesting, though, is that consumers are generally trusting, and not always, but generally trusting the government's response. And they're actually optimistic about returning to a more normal, and I say that in quotes because it's going to be a new normal. It's not going to be, it's going to be like a restart or a reset. But consumers are optimistic about that. They think that once the crisis is kind of over, or it's on a more manageable terms, that the recovery is actually going to happen quickly. Now, so people are generally finding, more than half of Canadians are finding themselves overwhelmed with the amount of information that they're receiving. And they're actually now starting to filter. In the beginning, everybody wanted to read everything, but now people are being a bit more pragmatic, and they're starting to filter who they listen to, how often they listen, and what type of media they consume. So a lot of them are watching TV and movies, Netflix, that sort of thing, and any of those apps where you can watch, movies together, watch Netflix together. Those are really popular. Social media is huge. And this is where people are they're willing to engage with social media, whether it's through likes or comments or whatever, and actually are purchasing on social media. So a recent survey I looked at said that more than 1/3 of consumers have actually bought something, in the past 30 days on social media. So that's really, really good for brands that are looking to, my budgets have been cut, and how do I mobilize to still stay top of mind? And on that, I'll just finish this point on one other thing, which I found really interesting, is that, and I'm just looking at my stats here, only 18% said they want brands to stop advertising at all. And majority of people actually want brands to continue to advertise, but to be respectful and to be advertising or marketing in that proper way. So they want to know how brands are helping during the crisis, what they're doing for their employees, how they're doing good in the community, and they want brands to be there when they are ready to purchase.
And I would take a bit of a B2B. So Christine gave an awesome B2C summary. I think from a B2B perspective, what I'm seeing is many of the companies that I'm talking to are thinking about where their industry is going and what their clients are going to see 6 to 12 months from now. So they're starting to change again from crisis management, like Christine was talking about, and not thinking about the toilet paper necessarily, but thinking about the transition to working from home and thinking about the sudden loss of revenue. And now they're thinking more about, okay, so what's going to happen to my industry and to my customers in the next 6, 12, 18 months? And then what does that mean for my business? So does my customer start to change? Am I targeting a new audience? Does my product need to change? Am I needing to fill a different need? And seeing some really cool B2B companies pivoting or picking up features of their product that maybe they weren't even talking about before, that are now suddenly in this new world really important. And so, they're thinking about how does their business need to change? How does their marketing need to change as their customers do?
So actually what's interesting about that, I'll just add on to what Heather said from a B2B standpoint. Some of the media that has increased has been social as well, but also search. Search is one of those things, I guess, when people, as Heather said, from the work from home environment, they have a little bit more time to do things like listen to podcasts and webinars and find out more information. And that thing you've always wanted to do, you can now find a little bit more about it, even from a B2B standpoint. So search has gone up exponentially during the past, I guess, what is it now, month and a half, I think, since we've been officially work from home.
Yeah, and I've seen customers starting to respond differently to learning opportunities too, where maybe before they wouldn't have time for a podcast or a webinar. Now they're like,
Right.
oh yeah, I can do this. So yeah, it's interesting to see that as an opportunity for marketers too, right? And so now all of a sudden, educational content, as you say, if you start posting blog posts and making them available, people have time to review them because they are in a different environment.
I got to think too
For
that
sure.
to some extent, people are doing a lot of searching on YouTube to find videos on how to do things as well. So I imagine video plays into that quite a bit as well.
Absolutely.
Actually, video production and consumption has gone up. I don't have the stats in front of me, but it's also gone up exponentially. People are creating video at home. Like we've seen, late night being done at home, right? Like Norm doing this at home, Saturday Night Live being done at home, which is
even
like
the
really,
news is being produced from home.
News is being produced from home. And actually, so for one of my clients, we produced a full TV commercial with everybody working from home, totally remote.
Oh, wow.
Whereas in the past, we could never do that, right? And now it's being done totally from home because we have, you have no other option. So it's actually interesting to see this. What do they say? Necessity is the mother of invention. Like this creativity, not only in what we produce, but in how we produce it and how quickly we are bringing things to market. Because gone are the days where we now have like 2 or 3 weeks to plan and then 3 months for production. That all has to be done in a week now.
Amazing. Looks like we have a couple of questions come in. So I'm just going to bring this one up. This is from Jim. He's curious, what are some of the mistakes that we're seeing right now happening? Any thoughts on that?
My favorite one so far is being off tone. So, like we talked about when we were doing our prep call, companies that are either still sending out the same messages they did pre all of this, happy, ignoring the fact that there's anything going on, like not even acknowledging that the world is a changed place. To me, that is one of the biggest fundamental mistakes that marketers are making. If you don't acknowledge that people are living in a time of difficulty and challenge and change, they're never going to pay attention to what you have to say.
I agree 100%. What people want right now, whether you're B2B, B2C, doesn't matter where, they want authenticity and they want transparency.
Yeah.
So yes, I may be prepared I do want to buy something, but acknowledge the situation that we are all in right now, and then I will go and buy from you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great perspective. I was just thinking about, I help out with a little local restaurant to do some marketing, and we just put them up on OpenTable, unfortunately, just before this happened. And they were completely, rocked by this. They had only been open for about a year, just launched on OpenTable, and had to close the doors and just take a pause and sort of strategically think about what their next steps were. And OpenTable kept delivering these automated sort of cheery onboarding messages to us, which were really, really a bit tone deaf at the time. And even when I reached out and said, you might want to just turn that off for a bit or turn it off for certain people, she said, yeah, we really don't have the ability to do that. And I thought, boy, that automation can be your friend in a lot of cases, but it has the potential to really cause some damage in certain situations like this. Any advice you'd give people who, automation is a tool, it's a really valuable tool, helps companies scale their marketing efforts, but how should they be using it in cases like this?
I would say my own experience is, all the automation tools that we have give us some flexibility to modify the messaging. And I would be going back through every automated message you have in your systems. And some of them you just need to stop. Some of them you need to rebuild or remessage. Some of them it might be as simple as changing your intro message, right? And adding I hope you and your family are safe. And, I know this is a really tough time. We hope this information is helpful for you under these circumstances. Like even just acknowledging it at the very beginning and then leaving everything else mostly the same might be okay. But I would start by almost pressing the stop button or at least the pause button.
I agree. I don't think because normally we as marketers would promote that, build all your content 6 months in advance, have it ready. Even your quote unquote evergreen content may not be appropriate now. fully echo what Heather said. You have to take a look at absolutely everything. And I think that automation in that context is not what we can do right now, because not only is it changing day to day, but it is changing hour by hour, depending on, like, by the time we get off this webinar now, there will have been an announcement of some sort that could change what we're doing. So you really do, unfortunately, have to take a look at it. Where automation can help you, though, is once you have your message crafted from an auto response, say when you're online or on social or like that sort of thing. Like, so from those triggered messages, once you have that message crafted, that's where automation, I think, can help you right now. But from a messaging standpoint, you got to put in the work every day.
Absolutely. And I think that's right. Well, and I think this is a time, Christine, you brought up social media, right? Like, this is a time when your social media managers should be not planning their calendar 6 months ahead or even 6 hours ahead. Like, you actually need to be almost live with your social activity, right? And picking up things as they happen. So, adding your own perspective and your own commentary, but you've got to show that you're paying attention and that you're on it. And hopefully your social media managers have a little bit more time to spend on that and can actually stay in the live environment.
So consumers have said that they are watching how companies respond. So a couple of things. So first of all, consumers have said that as much as they rely on government, it's going to be brands that get them through this as well. And what brands are doing. Like, we have some great local examples of phenomenal companies that have just pivoted to to respond to this, but brands are going to be what get us through this, and consumers are watching what brands do and how they react and things that they say during this time period. So to Heather's point, if your social is not responding in the way or it's tone deaf or it's not responding in the way that they want, they are going to remember afterwards, and they are making note of that.
And companies that are doing things like participating in PPE drives, or like you said, Christine, helping their employees and doing things that reflect that they understand what's going on right now and that they're committed to being a good presence in the community. Those are the companies that people will remember most.
Agreed.
Well, actually, that's a great segue to a question that Nelson from Skylight brought up here. I'm just going to add it to the broadcast. How should brands think about their photo and videos and how those align with their messaging when they're pushing out messages? And it's interesting because, you see a lot of sort of the standard photos are, people shaking hands, people in meetings together. If you're messaging, do you have to be aware of that? How can you incorporate the sort of visual elements of that into your messaging?
Do you want me to start, Heather?
Go for it.
So let's just say you shouldn't have shaking hand photos or hugging and kissing photos. I think imagery right now plays a really, really important part in the messages that we put out. And you really have to, I think at this point in time, you almost have to overanalyze what your imagery is saying, and showing people in a gathering that isn't obviously family, that's not good. Showing them out at a restaurant, hugging, holding hands, whatever, that sort of thing is not is not what people want to see right now. And it's not, and they take offense from it. Even if you post, what I have seen also is that there will be an image posted on social of people gathering, for example, and then right underneath it says, this image was taken, pre, all of this. People don't read that. They do not read it for sure. So therefore, immediately they're jumping all over it, even if you say, you have qualified it. So I think imagery, you have to be very careful what you're putting out. You also have to make sure it's reflective of your brand. You are still a brand marketer, whether you're B2B or you're B2C, you're still a brand marketer, and you have to be reflective of your brand. It has to be authentic to your brand. Don't try to be something you aren't. If you have nothing to do with a certain area, don't try to play there now, because people will see through you.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think, and as you said, Norm, earlier, like, YouTube content right now is becoming increasingly important, right, and increasingly relevant. Absolutely. And I think the other thing is educational content. So if you're going to create content right now, make it valuable, right? So if you're Home Depot, like, make videos on how to and get those published and get them out fast, right? And things that people will be doing at home by themselves because we don't have the option of not, right? So for me, I was watching one yesterday on how to install closet doors, right? And we're doing the same thing at PPO, right? We're thinking about, okay, how can we help our clients right now, B2B clients, to learn about things that'll be relevant to them and also hopefully help us, right? So if you are going to create video content, yes, fast is 100% important, and doing stuff that's educational and helpful, not just sales content.
So I would say, for all of this, you go back to the basics, right? Back to the basics of marketing. What do your consumers want? Not what do I have to sell and what do I want my message to be, but what do my consumers or my prospects or just people I'm trying to engage with, what do they want to hear? And then kind of feed that back.
Yeah, and what are they caring about right now? Because that's
Exactly.
probably different than it was 6 weeks ago.
Absolutely, for sure.
And we know everybody's feeling insecure. I loved reading a couple of articles recently talking about everyone's going through a grieving process. And so think about, what's in your mind when you're going through a grieving process. We're all in the process of letting go, right? We're letting go of social contact. If Easter weekend was something important in your family or Passover or whatever, family celebration, we all let go of something this weekend, right? And we're letting go of the coffee chats that we don't get to have at the office anymore. So we're having our coffee chats like this. And so, in that grieving process and in that loss process, there's a lot of mental things that happen. And therefore, our customers are in a very different mental space. And we need to be there with them.
Agreed.
Jim Beretta actually asks another follow-up question. I'll just put it up here. Jim asks, is there a best place in social media to be? Is Instagram on your radars? That's a great question.
My answer back, Jim, would be, where are your customers? And so, if I think about B2B, Instagram may or may not be the right place. If I think about B2C, like my own behavior in the last couple of weeks, I've switched from Facebook to Instagram because Facebook's full of stuff that is just depressing. And at least on Instagram, it's a little bit less depressing. So, yeah, I think start with your customer.
I echo that. Again, it's like, I don't think we can lose sight of the marketing basics, right? You have to be where where it makes sense for you. And just like if you had asked me that question 3 months ago, I would have said it depends, right? It depends on what your goals are, what your brand is, who your target audience is, all of that stuff. But Instagram does seem to be the place where more kind of happy people are. Twitter is more for news. It's still kind of the same thing it was before, right? So
what I found really interesting on Instagram in particular is a lot of the local places, a lot of the local stores have really shifted to Instagram as a place to be promoting and selling their products. And even if they're on a Shopify or they've got themselves a web store now that they didn't have before, Instagram is still a great place for them to be promoting the products that they're selling. And so it's been a really interesting shift to see Instagram move in that direction, and some brands that I've watched locally that have done a really, really good job at that.
That's great. And actually, Jim followed up with another question. Thanks, Jim. Just bring it up here. What else can companies do to market through this time? Are there other innovative ideas that you have seen?
Christine, do you want to start on that?
Oh. Sorry, I'm losing you just a sec here.
Okay, no problem. Well, here, I can jump in the meantime. So I think one of the things that I've seen is, again, like we talked about before, switching from truly sales content to more educational content. And so, rather than trying to promote, especially in a B2B context, rather than trying to promote the same things you would have 3 or 4 weeks ago, thinking about how can you educate your customer, knowing that they may or may not be buying right now. And the other thing, like we mentioned before too, is looking at your product in terms of who might need it more right now, or what features might be more relevant right now. And stopping what you have been doing, take a pause, and really look hard, starting with your customer, at what do they need, and how might we be able to fill that right now. Because it is often very different, I think, in this environment than it was even 6 weeks ago. Christine, are you back now?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I had. And see, this is just the beauty of working from home, right?
Yeah, the internet browns out at least once a day.
Sorry, Norm, I missed that last question there.
Oh, Jim had asked, what else can companies do to market through this time? Any other innovative ideas that you've seen? Anything that you've seen that's caught your attention?
You know what? It's been the traditional channels, traditional channels, the regular channels, but it's just in how they message. I guess some really, really clever ways. Like everybody, I think, has seen kind of, it makes its rounds, like the mouse trap. You know, with the ball and all the mouse traps and about the social distancing. So things like that. Some of the car companies, automotive is also obviously very near and dear to my heart. And the automotive has had some spectacular advertising, and not only around obviously, you know, taking staying home message, but also about what they're doing on the front line. So some of the companies have been very, very strong from that standpoint. I would say the innovation has come from the messaging and from how they've got it done, as opposed to a different channel or a different tactic. Yeah,
I was super impressed with Ford's very quick pivot to their campaign, which was around what was they? It's built to lend a hand. You know, it was built Ford tough. Now it's built to lend a hand. So really, sort of, and getting away from sort of the visual images of the truck to really very much just plain text and really empathetic. I found that was really good. And then I think Hyundai also did one, their assurance campaign, basically just outright saying, you know, if you're considering a vehicle but you're worried about losing your job, if you lose your job in the next year, just return the vehicle. I mean, it was very plain and frank and easily spoken. I just thought it was impressive to see. Now, of course, they have big agencies and they can turn that stuff around, but I was impressed to see them make that pivot so quickly.
So big agencies are great, but it can also be a hindrance as well because it is a big agency.
Right.
Just like a small agency is great because they can be agile, but can also be a hindrance because it's a small agency too. So I really think it's all the people and the passion that people put out and that they need to know. Like, I mean, we have to react. We have to turn things around. And that is what I've been amazed about, is how quickly, you know, I'm a marketer, like, and, you know, we're all marketers. Like, we know how long it takes to produce something. We've cut that down by 90% now.
Right.
And if you look at another thing, if we talk about kind of innovation, if you look at some of these companies and like how they've changed their logos. So a logo is something you never touch. Like, that's almost like the holy grail, right? You do not touch that. And then all of a sudden they've changed them to put distancing between their letters or distancing between their, like, between their images, right? Like, you know, Burger King, home of the Whopper. It's home of the stay-at-home Whopper, right? Like, it's kind of, it's so clever and it's so authentic and like to their brand. It's really, like, I mean, I love seeing it. It's really exciting. And I think it's amazing to see these big brands embracing it, right? Embracing something that they would never, you know, if you asked them 12 months ago, they're like, I'll never touch my logo. And now, you know, they're out doing it. I think it's awesome. I love it. I love to see the industry doing that.
You know what? I would summarize all of what we just said in 2 words: customer empathy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. That's what it is. If we can spend our time as marketers being empathetic to our customers, we will always succeed. So, you know, Burger King, what are their customers doing? Staying at home. Awesome.
Exactly.
They miss their Whoppers. I know my kids, it's not Burger King, it's McDonald's. I'm embarrassed to admit. But you know, that's what they just want to go to McDonald's and get a hamburger, right? And I'm like, ew. But
see, that's an example of a brand who, like, I mean, they understand that you can't do that right now,
that's right? Exactly.
So it's empathetic, it's transparent and authentic. Like, I mean, I think that's like it's key for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great point.
100%.
Jim brought up an interesting point. I'll just bring it up and say, this is Forefathers Brewing is delivering beer and sharing profits with first responders. That's amazing, right?
That's super cool.
It is, and that's another example of a local company. I love Forefathers. example of a local company who is just, what can they do to give back? Heather, something you said earlier, I think right before maybe I kind of blacked out there for a minute, triggered something. And it's about, so there is a local company, or maybe it was you, Norm, when you're talking about Open Table. There's a local company who had just opened their doors. They're a kind of a foodie type place. And they had opened their doors maybe a month before this whole work from home thing happened. They don't have a website because they weren't planning on going online. They're going to be, bricks and mortar, and have now suddenly had to, figure out, how am I going to sell? They still don't have a website. They do their posting on primarily on Instagram, a little bit on Facebook, and they're doing the porch drop-offs within our region. But it's all being done like you just see an Instagram post and it's like, oh, I like that, like that Caesar mix or whatever it is there. And that's how and then you message them and they're taking, you're doing transfer or whatever. But that is how, like an example of a company that has had to suddenly adapt during this time period. Social is what is going to keep them afloat, hopefully, until they can go back to opening their doors again.
I've actually been really surprised at the variety of different ways that local restaurants are handling it. So some of them, like you say, Christine, didn't have a website beforehand, but now everything's digital. They've responded super fast. Right. A lot of them have been really smart, not just restaurants, but local businesses too, about using Instagram and using Facebook because it's a much easier way to communicate. But I've also had a couple of companies that I've been like, I would really like to buy from, name the company. And I go to their website, I go to their Facebook page, I go to their Instagram page if they even have one, and they're out of date and there's nothing on there about COVID-19. And it's so frustrating. And I ended up in one case, I called the store and they're like, oh yeah, we've got curbside, we're all set up, everything's all good. And I thought, okay, then why the hell don't you take the 5 minutes, post it on all your social media channels? Even if your website's really hard to update, people will go and look on social media to get the information. But if your social channels are out of date, or even, if your Google profile's out of date and I search up your company, those things are really annoying as a consumer and probably leave you with lost opportunities.
And it's something that you will remember afterwards, right?
That's right.
Maybe not necessarily negatively, but it'll be kind of like, oh, well, this other company was always there. I'm going to keep going back to them, right?
That's right. Exactly.
They showed me how they could do this. They could do the porch drop-offs or whatever it was, right?
Yeah, exactly right. And it shows that the business hasn't kept track of what its consumers are doing, right? They haven't kept up.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Totally fair.
I was so happy when the Lancaster Smokehouse opened back up for picking up parking lot pickup. That was, I'm a bit of a.
Oh, their food is so good.
Yeah, good for you.
So
too.
Good.
Jim asked another great question. I'll just bring it up here, and we talked about this a little bit ahead of time. Marketing next phase will be recovery. What are your thoughts on recovery marketing, and how do you decide when you make that pivot, or how do you make that pivot? It's a great question, Jim.
It is. Christine, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be not so much of a restart, but maybe like a reset of kind of like there is, I don't want to say the new normal, right? But it's going to be kind of a reset. What's my business going to look like? And when am I going to be ready? Well, that's the $1 million question. But I think, again, I'd come back to what we were talking about before. Look to your consumers. Look to your customers, your prospects, whatever, your owners, whatever business you're in, and look to see when they're ready. Some of them are actually still buying now, depending on obviously what business you're in and what you're, obviously. But look to them and see when they're ready. And when they're ready, start putting that message out. But you're going to have to change, I think, maybe the way you had that message before. So depending on brands, what's really interesting, a little bit of an aside, is if you look at the past, I think it's like 3 or 4 recessions that we've had, brands that actually advertised through the recession came out stronger afterwards and had less of a ramp up to get back to maybe where they were or even further along. Now, we were slowly heading into a recession, perhaps, some people thought before all of this happened. And so this is a little bit of a different time, and, budgets have been cut, et cetera, et cetera. But whatever you can do to try to keep your message out there respectfully, authentically, as we've talked about during this time period, and then just it's almost like you have to have yourself ready so that when consumers want to come back and purchase, you will be ready for them, and you take your cues from them. And then you kind of start ramping that message out and you see what's happening in the world.
I think the other thing I would add, so I would echo Christine 100%, and I would add to it that what I'm hearing now is, the important thing from a B2B perspective is to think that, recovery is not tomorrow. And we're not going to be going back to whatever normal was. We're going to have a new normal, and it's probably 12 to 18 months away. Right. And so as you're thinking about your marketing and planning for, whatever word we want to use, recovery or return or whatever. But, we need to be thinking 12 to 18 months down the road and keeping our marketing flexible for at least that long. So being present, being there with your consumers, being empathetic to them, but knowing that, you shouldn't be making, this is not the time to be doing 24-month planning, other than to say that, other than to say that your 24, exactly. And your 24-month plan should be who the hell knows, right? And should be as flexible as a cooked piece of spaghetti, because it really is not, there is no certainty. There's not going to be certainty for a while. So being visible, being present, being with your customers, keeping those relationships going. Right. And knowing that, it's going to be 18 to 24 months of who the hell knows.
Flexibility, I think, is key, because we really don't know. You can listen to all the experts. We get briefings from the banks, from the government, from, your Aunt Fanny, whoever, right? But I think nobody really knows for sure. So, you've got to be flexible and take your cues from the market, take your cues from your customers. And then, if it's 1 month versus 24 months, how do you keep that communication, that engagement, and keep your customers and prospects warm, right, during that time period, authentically?
Agreed.
Do you think there are practices that we're learning now that were kind of ahas for us that just make sense to keep on doing as we go through this?
I do. I think that we're going to find the quote unquote experts would say, and also I would agree, I think we're going to find that a lot more businesses are going to be online than they thought they would be, and they're going to be online quicker and perhaps doing more of their business online. So grocery is an interesting one to look at. I don't have any current clients in grocery, but just from reading a lot about it, because obviously a lot of people are trying to do, online delivery or curbside pickup or whatever. And the consumer sentiment right now is that they're not going to go back to going into the grocery store once all this is over, right? So I think we're going to see some shifts in how people shop and how people consume, and then therefore that's going to make a shift in how we market. So a lot more digital, a lot more online for sure.
I think the other thing that's going to change is that listening to the customer. If I think about the startup world and the B2B environment, I see a lot of companies who get really focused on the idea and the product. And that doesn't help you in this time at all, right? If you are going to be marketing in this period, you might have gotten away with it 6 months ago or even 6 weeks ago to not listen to your customer if you had a really interesting product. But now that just won't happen. And so, the companies that succeed out of all this will have a high capability in customer listening and customer empathy. And if they don't, I don't think they'll make it through. Yeah,
I think consumers have become smarter during this time period, right?
That's right. Exactly.
They've really, that's actually really interesting. It'll be kind of neat to see how that all plays out, to watch that.
I agree. And I love watching some of the customer company interactions happening, right? Like you talked about before, Christine, right? Like companies that are doing those really good community focused outreach efforts and are really listening to what their customers have to say. People really love that, right? And they're more loyal. They're buying things they would not have bought previously because they like and appreciate the brand and the work they're doing.
Actually, that's a really good point. So people buying things maybe they wouldn't have previously, because I think like a lot of Canadians, like a lot of us are kind of thinking, even if we haven't lost our jobs or our incomes, but we're kind of being maybe cognizant of what we're buying and because you don't know, right?
That's
But
right.
then you will find yourself, I know I have, buying something that, is kind of is definitely not an essential item, but because maybe you appreciate them, and you're also trying to shop local, right?
That's
like
right.
you're trying
Exactly.
like these local companies, like the one I talked about before that just opened a month before all this happened. I want to make sure that they're there, right?
That's
like
right.
when we come back out of this. So
Yeah.
we're shopping a little bit differently than we have in the past, and we're consuming media, we're consuming all these goods differently than we have in the past.
Absolutely. I had an interesting experience a couple of weeks ago. So we bought takeout, also not an essential item, but I'm trying to support a local business. And when I walked into the restaurant to pick up my food, the cues I was looking for were how much did this restaurant actually care about their customers and their product. And I was so impressed. I walked in the door. The first thing I saw was the Lysol wipes and the hand sanitizer right there. So,
Right.
totally visible, immediately accessible to me. They'd set up a table so that we could maintain the physical distance between me and the person who was bringing me my food. He showed me how they cleaned the packaging before they gave it to me. And there was so much pride and care in how they had treated my food
Right.
that it made me confident then to go back. And I had a contrasting experience going to a large chain store, which I will not be darkening the doors of again, where I walked in, there was nothing there to be cleaning. There were no staff there making sure that the carts were clean or that the doors were clean or any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
And there was no visible effort made anywhere in the whole store. This was in the days when the store was still open. But there was no visible effort made. And so now for me as a consumer, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to the places where they actually care and their care is reflected. So I think whether it's in the virtual world or the physical world, the level of effort that brands are putting in to make consumers feel comfortable and confident is going to be a really important thing.
Agreed, for sure.
Totally agree. Just a final thought. We have no more questions online, although we have a couple more minutes if anybody wants to ask more questions. Heather, you have a background in product as well. We've been talking about marketing and messaging, but what about on the product side?
So I think, like I'd mentioned a little bit earlier, Norm, one of the things that I see happening is the way people are using products is changing, and therefore the way they market those products is changing, right? So if you think about, Zoom is a great example, right? Yeah. Zoom was a tool that you used once in a while when you had to do a webinar or you had to get people together from multiple locations. Now Zoom is like it is an essential service, right? We don't get through any days without touching Zoom. And so Zoom has had this like exponential demand on their product. And all of a sudden, all these problems are emerging, right? There's security issues. And I know one of my clients has actually blocked access to Zoom, so we can't use it because of the things that have happened. And so, as a product manager, we're now in use case world that we were never, ever going to think about prior to the beginning of March. And so as a product manager, you need to be really adept right now at doing the same thing that your marketers are doing, listening to your customer, thinking about how their use cases have changed, and thinking about what opportunities that opens up. Maybe there's a feature that was on your roadmap for 2 years from now. Oh, we may get a cat in the video here. He loves being on video conference. Anyway, there's his ears. Here's Riley. Say hi. Anyway, so as a product manager, being empathetic, thinking about your customers just like you would as a marketer, and looking at what are the use cases that have emerged that never existed before. And they may disappear in 6 months, but right now they are essential. And if they can get you in front of a customer, get you a new loyal customer, that will be to your advantage when 18 months or 24 months from now have passed.
I agree. Yeah.
Awesome. Actually, we have one more question from Skylight. Just bring it up here. Yeah, great question. Any specific advice for B2B companies specifically?
I think so. A couple things for me. One is what I've seen with, at least in the PPO world, is customers are actually starting to polarize. So there are ones that are doing super well in this environment and ones that are not. And so, really understanding your segmentation model may not work in the new world. And in fact, at PPO, we've pivoted our segmentation model. So that's kind of something that a lot of companies I have seen, haven't thought through yet is, how could you redefine your customers to create and open new opportunities? Same thing's true in B2C, but maybe a little bit less so. So that segmentation model is something to go back to and take a look at for sure.
So I would echo that. I think with that segmentation, who your customer was before is still your customer, but also I think that customer has changed a little bit too, right? Like
that's right.
Looking at it, and again, if we think back to the Zoom, Zoom was primarily a B2B product. I don't know what the percentage is, right, before this, and now my 80-something-year-old mother is using it for her book club, right? So it's like, I think from a B2B standpoint, whoever your customer was and your objectives before, kind of open that up. Take those edges and corners away and don't play in that. Totally be open to how can this shift and how can I be looking at this in a different way.
And you know what, I would even take that one step further and think about the buyer if you're in a B2B context. So does the buyer change? So maybe, your customer segment is the same, but the person who can pay attention to you right now may be different, right? So it may be that your primary buyer is in total crisis mode, holy shit, the world is just falling apart for me. But there's a peer in another department that has time on their hands and is actually trying to think long term and think about recovery and think about what might happen, 12, 18 months from now.
Or a stronger influencer than they were in the past, perhaps.
Exactly. And I think the other thing I would say is framing not only through crisis, but what does recovery look like? And so, setting up your organization for benefit in 12 to 18 months is also a great message, right? And so thinking about who are those segments that recovery is super important to, or that brand is super important to, and how do you get through to them?
I would actually, I agree with that. I think that's a really important point you hit on, Heather, because so right now we're marketing right now for today, for this hour, for that time period. But the reality is we are going to get through this. This will come to, I don't know if I want to say an end, but it's going to, things will start to reset. We will get through this. So the brands that can be prepared for that, and I agree, we can't do 24-month planning, of course, right? But you have to have some sort of loose framework of what that could potentially look like. So maybe it's a different person that's starting to think that way now, right? But you have to be able to take that into consideration. So short and long term has never been more important.
No, that's right. And having some imagination, right? Because this is there's so much uncertainty right now. Nobody really knows, but just have some imagination and use it well.
Agreed. Yeah. For sure.
And I think on every one of these that I've done, I've commented that I've just seen such creativity from people, just people doing things that, necessity is the mother of invention, or necessity is the mother of innovation, as I say. But I've just seen people do some amazing things with their products, with their marketing. It's I hope this is something that carries on. I hope this creativity and this sort of outpouring of empathy and support for people carries on beyond this, and we just don't revert back to the way we did things before. I hope this is good comes from this.
I agree. I do too. It'd be nice to, a year from now, for us to, we won't be at this heightened level, but to still be feeling that creativity and that innovation in this way.
I agree.
Agreed.
You guys have been fantastic. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. We really appreciate it. It was nice seeing you.
It's been super fun, Norm. Thank you.
You're welcome.
For sure. Thank you, Norm.
And thanks to everybody online for joining us and for the great questions. Really appreciate it. Next week, we're going to have Mike Gribineau on. Mike is a marketing operations professional, understands the sort of deep insides of things like Salesforce and all the automations. Mike has a great experience with that. So if you're a RevOps geek, you won't want to miss next week's session. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.